Welcome to another broadcast of Classes in Session, and this is your brother Willie Muhammad. And once again, we want to thank each and every one of you all for tuning in every Monday here at WBOK, where it's Real Talk for Real Time, 12:30 a.m. And today, brothers and sisters, we have a very special guest, a brother that is doing a great work, and as it relates to definitely enlightening and educating our people. We have with us our brother Khalid El Hakim, and I'll give you just a brief background of our brother, dear brothers and sisters. He's a hip-hop scholar, an author, and an educator, and he's a collector of, we'll say, Black history artifacts and just a variety of things. And from the research that I've been doing on our brother, it is said that he has over 7,000 of these historical documents and pictures and a lot of other stuff. So I don't want to delay it. Let's get right down to our interview. So welcome, my brother.
Thank you, brother. Assalamu alaikum, brother Willie. How you doing?
I'm fine, man. And as I said, brother, I really am thankful for the opportunity to have this chance to interview you and to help expose the citizens here of New Orleans, especially in the Black community, about the work you're doing. So before we get into the meat of the interview, can you tell the listening audience a little bit more about yourself?
Yes, sir. I was born and raised in Detroit, product of the Detroit Public Schools. I went to college at Ferris State University back in the early 90s. But after I graduated from Ferris, I became a Detroit Public School teacher, and I taught in the Detroit Public Schools for 15 years. And along with teaching, these artifacts that I've amassed over the past 26 years became objects that I used in the classroom to teach my students about Black history and the importance of knowing who they were and their purpose in their lives. So,
wow. So you have what is called the Black History 101 Mobile Museum. Share with us some more. Tell us some more about that.
The Black History 101 Mobile Museum is a collection of, as you said, about 7,000 artifacts of original memorabilia that dates from the transatlantic slave era up to hip-hop culture. And I started collecting these artifacts shortly after taking intro to sociology class with a professor up at Ferris State University who started a museum called the Jim Crow Museum of Racist Memorabilia. And this collection that he had is just a collection of some of the most ugliest racist memorabilia coming out of slavery up until recent times, where you might go into some places today and see reproductions of kind of like the bamboozle type memorabilia that Spike Lee had in his movie. But it was that type of memorabilia that he used in his class to teach about racism in America, and I was inspired from his class, and I started going into antique shops and used bookstores and flea markets and garage sales, picking up that type of memorabilia. But also, I'm a product of the 1980s hip hop generation, so my Black consciousness was raised by artists like Public Enemy and KRS-One and X-Clan and Rakim and those cats back in the day. And I started collecting that type of memorabilia too after listening to Public Enemy and learning about the Black Panther Party and the Nation of Islam and everybody from Asad Shakur to Marcus Garvey. And I started picking up that type of memorabilia as well and just kind of bridging those gaps in our sojourn in America. And I started using this memorabilia and sharing it in the public and just helping to raise the consciousness of our people, man, because we just don't know who we are in America. And using these types of artifacts as a way for us to be reminded and educated on our history.
Wow. And what made you do a mobile museum?
That's a great question, man. The mobile piece, the idea for that actually came as a result of me attending the Million Man March in 1995. Wow. And the minister gave us our walking orders and told us to go back to our communities and make a difference. And prior to that, the collection I had was just a private collection. Just things that, when people came over to my house, I would share with them or whatever. But I was really, really inspired by the minister's message, man. And he encouraged us to go back and join organizations. So I went back and one of the organizations that was really doing something in the streets in Detroit was an organization called the New Marcus Garvey Movement. And it was led by Minister Malik Shabazz out of Detroit. Mm-hmm. And I started going to his weekly meetings, and during the meetings, I would just have a table or two of memorabilia set up. And as people saw the things I had, they were inspired and, just very inquisitive and wanted to learn more. So from there, I started going around to different other community meetings, and then I started going into churches and started to go to public libraries, and it just kind of grew from there. And, 25 years later, man, it's, I'm here in Dallas, Texas this weekend at the National Conference on Race and Ethnicity in Higher Education, which actually will be in New Orleans next year at the same time next year in June. So I look forward to bringing the museum to New Orleans next year.
Well, that answers one of the questions that I was definitely planning on asking, man. What can we do to get you here to the city of New Orleans? And definitely when
we
that
don't
comes,
have to. We don't have to wait a full year. We can, can do a lot sooner than that. But but that's something that's definitely on the schedule for this time next year.
So if you don't what would it take for to get you here to the city of New Orleans prior to next year?
Brother, just an invitation. Just an invitation, and I will come down there, brother. This work, man, is needed, and our people are suffering, and we're suffering from a lack of knowledge. So if this can be a vehicle to help our people out, then all praise is due to Allah, man. If I get an invitation, I'm coming.
Okay, well, we're going to look into that, man, and get the community behind it, because what you're doing is extremely important, and it's interesting that you have experience as an educator in the Detroit school system. One of the articles I read, it said in the middle school. So what was your experience like when you would bring the artifacts and what you were learning, to your classroom?
So one of the assumptions that a lot of people make, and educators make, and people in general make, is that our students don't want to learn anything about history, which is a lie. And it's a lie because when you want to teach children about history or anything, you have to make it relevant to their experience, and you have to be creative and innovative in the way that you present this material to the youth. So, for me, using artifacts to give students a very real example of how people lived at a different time, or a different experience that people had. I mean, I would bring in chains from slavery into the classroom, and another assumption is that our kids don't like to write, for example. So imagine bringing in chains from slavery, original chains from slavery, and then asking the students to imagine if those chains could talk, what they would say. And then all of a sudden you have a classroom of students just writing and writing and writing. And you got to beg them to stop writing. You know what I'm saying? So you have to present this material in certain ways and inspire our students to write, read, think deeper, think critically. And these artifacts, again, are a great way to do that.
Wow, and what you said is so key, because myself, I also, in addition to the many other things that I do, teach in the school system as well, and I can bear witness to what you're saying. Now, also, you in the stuff that I've read, and even in your what you've shared with us, you talked about how in this museum you also have elements of hip hop.
Yeah.
So most people think about a Black History Museum. They may just stick to documents by civil rights leaders or like you said, some of the chains and different things like that. What made you also include hip hop?
The reason why hip-hop is included is several reasons. One of the main reasons is that hip-hop is a continuation from the Black arts movement. And, if you're talking about what the legacy of James Brown is, and Sly and the Family Stone, and Aretha Franklin, and George Clinton, Parliament Funkadelics, if you talk about the legacy of the last poets and where the Black arts movement went to, it went directly into hip-hop. So we make that connection. If you want to talk about Tupac Shakur, for example, you can't talk about Tupac Shakur without talking about his mother, Afeni Shakur. If you talk about Sister Afeni, you can't talk about her without talking about the Black Panther Party. If you talk about the Black Panther Party, you can't talk about them without talking about the legacy of Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam. You know what I'm saying? And you can just take it all the way back. So there's many different, ways in terms of teaching hip hop that connects to our broader history. And then when we look at the elements of hip hop, with the fifth element being knowledge of self, when we look at just having knowledge of self, I mean, there's just so many ways that we go and again, these artifacts are used to kind of illuminate that history and get people talking. And really, the ultimate goal is to get us to dig a little bit deeper into our history and get to studying about the legacies of some of the greats that they're not learning about in school. So, I mean, everywhere I travel, you ask students, what they're learning about in terms of Black history, if they're teaching Black history at all. And in many cases, it's still the same leaders that we've been, learning about. It's, always Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, Malcolm X, and now, President Barack Obama and Michelle Obama. I mean, and that's unfortunately where, many of these conversations are in terms of Black history in America right now, at least in many of the places that I'm traveling to.
Wow. That's a key one, brother. That is, and it's still the same. And just like you said, now with those who they do learn about in Black history, now the list that they have approved that now you can learn. Now we're going to add President Barack Obama and his wife Michelle Obama. And when you talked about hip hop, and you talked about also how for yourself that also played a part in your awakening, in your consciousness. And
Absolutely.
One of the articles I read about you, it said you've had the opportunity to go overseas to different countries, and as it relates with hip hop or hip hop related activities. And I know now with what you're doing with the Black History Museum, from your personal experience, what have you witnessed as it relates to? I'm gonna ask two questions. One, with the global impact of hip hop, and two, because I think I saw something that said you've actually went to Hawaii with the mobile museum. What was the impact of the museum being in countries outside of America? So that's a two-part question.
So in terms of traveling overseas, the museum hasn't been physically overseas, but I've traveled overseas with. I used to manage Proof from the hip hop group G12. And so traveling overseas with Proof and seeing what the impact of hip-hop is, you travel to places where people don't speak English and they know every lyric to a song. So you see that very strong impact where, you see negative and positive. So, on the negative tip, you might go over to, a country and see white Europeans walking around with sagging pants, thinking that they're, quote unquote, being Black, and trying to explain to them like that's not the totality of Blackness. You know what I'm saying? Like you're performing Blackness, and it's offensive. Or with somebody approaching you and wanting to speak slang that they heard from hip hop, and we take it as being, I take it as offensive, you know what I'm saying? So that's problematic. But at the same time, there's movements in certain countries in the world where hip-hop is being used as a form of revolutionary expression, where, you have places like Egypt where, hip-hop was their soundtrack to their revolution during the Arab Spring. You know what I'm saying? So you see that type of thing, that, these cats have been really, really listening to Public Enemy and taking that stuff to heart and really, motivating and singing about revolutionary experiences that they're having in their day-to-day lived experience. So that's one of the positive things. And then to your second question, the impact of the museum going to places like Hawaii, man, it's been phenomenal. I mean, it's for people who've never been to a black museum before, for people who have only been taught black history via the lens of Martin Luther King, and even with King, it's only through the lens of the I Have a Dream speech. For them to see a broader view of black history has been powerful, man. And the fact that these artifacts can be used to spark conversations that people are not having about issues of social justice, it's quite an experience. And actually, when I went over to Hawaii, Professor Griff came over there with me as well and gave an incredible lecture on the impact of hip hop and how that ties into some of the museum work. And I definitely gotta give a shout out to Griff, who for the past 11 years now has toured quite a bit with the museum. Probably the majority of the places I go, Griff is with me.
Wow. That's something, man. I heard you in an interview, you said like pretty much 90% of the places where you have toured, he has been there with you. So that's a blessing. When I think about Professor Griff and Public Enemy and hip-hop, it was their music that began to lay the seeds to awaken myself personally up to consciousness as well. So that's powerful. Yeah. So we're coming up on our first break, and then we'll come back after this break and continue more conversation with our brother Khalid El Hakim. He's a hip hop scholar, author, educator, and collector of. He's also an author. We're going to talk about that book, your book that you are writing or have written. But he's right. What's the language, that the founder of the Black History 101 Mobile Museum. So once again, this is your brother Willie Muhammad. Classes in session. This is WBOK 1230 AM, where it is real talk for real time. We'll be back. We're back. This is your brother Willie Muhammad, and this is Classes in Session. And we want to continue our interview with brother Khalid El Hakim. He's the founder of the Black History 101 Mobile Museum. So, you've traveled to many cities, and I know you've had a wealth of experiences in coming into contact with many people. What have been some of the most memorable experiences that you have witnessed with people who have come out to take part in, to see the museum?
Man, it's been a very rich experience in terms of the many different people who have come through the exhibits. But one of the most interesting stories I tell a lot of people is we have a very diverse group of people who come through the museum. And one time I was in York, Pennsylvania, at a college campus, and a young white female student came through the exhibit, and she started crying in the exhibit. And I was trying to figure out, why she was so upset. And, and people, they get upset coming to the exhibit simply because we have Klan memorabilia on display. We have original lynching photographs and postcards from lynchings and just a variety of things that would make, the average person upset. But for her, it was something different about the way she was, crying, as she walked through. And I was trying to figure out, but I didn't want to engage her, but I just sat back and watched her for a while. And then eventually she came up to me and said that the reason why she was so upset is she was looking at the Klan hood and the Klan memorabilia, and she said that her father and her grandfather are both Klansmen, and that she sees that material every day in her house.
Wow.
And then by her seeing that in the context of the museum, it just made her, feel just, I guess it hit home. But she let me know that, that she's not, that she never felt like that was a part of her and that she didn't agree with it. But she's like, that's a part of my everyday experience. Like, I see it every day. So, and that kind of took me aback, too, because, that was my first time. I traveled with this Klan material, but I've never had someone who admitted having that close of a relationship with that organization. So that was a powerful experience. But on the other extreme, I've been places and I've had people like Angela Davis walk through the exhibit, and Tupac's mother has walked through the exhibit before, and to have someone like an Angela Davis walk through and point out different artifacts and give me a different history about some of the material. For example, I didn't know that she grew up on the same in the same neighborhood as the 4 little girls that got bombed in Birmingham.
Mm.
And she remembers, her sister was her older sister was friends with one of them. And I want to say her mother might have taught one in Sunday school, or someone close in her family taught one of the sisters and one of the little girls in Sunday school. But yeah, having someone like Angela Davis walk through was incredible, man. And it just lets you know that, the work that I'm doing, you realize that, I realized that, this work is a lot bigger than me, and that it's really for the people. And one of my greatest experiences was having a sit down with Minister Farrakhan and sharing some of the material with him. Wow. And him, yes sir, and him going through a folder I have of memorabilia from the Nation of Islam, and him just teaching using these artifacts, and also being humbled by him thanking me over and over again for preserving some of this material. That was, one of the greatest honors I've ever had in my life. So,
and brother, and because what you're doing, man, it is significant, because as you know, most museums are stationary.
Yes, sir.
They're stationary, but you're bringing it to different cities, to people, and the seeds that are being planted, and just the awakening that people have once they leave, and then, what they do after actually leaving, man, is so important. Out of all of the stuff that you have gathered, what artifacts have impacted you the most personally?
So, one of the things with me with just going through the process of collecting this material is that at the point that I'm collecting it, it's just all of it is just like significant, you know what I'm saying? And it's impactful at the point that I'm collecting it, because it's new, you know what I'm saying? So, but for me, the hip-hop material is extremely significant for me, just because that was a part of my lived experience. Like, I lived that era, you know what I'm saying? So that material is also the artifacts that I have that are signed by significant historical figures. So there's documents signed by Booker T. Washington, Frederick Douglass, George Washington Carver, Carter G. Woodson, Marcus Garvey, MLK, Malcolm, Rosa Parks, W.E.B. Du Bois, Lena Horne, Cap Calloway, and the list kind of goes on. Ralph Bunche, Minister Farrakhan, the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, Coretta Scott King, and the list goes on. So it's a very diverse collection. It's a very rich collection. But that material really impacts me, especially when I think about the material I have from the Jim Crow era, segregation signs, the Klan memorabilia, some of the negative, stereotypical type material, knowing that when that material was made, that we had scholars like a W.E.B. Du Bois that kind of disrupted those ideas that people had about blackness and about who we were in America, that you can't, for people to produce these negative stereotypical material, I mean, having a W.E.B. Du Bois step on the scene completely dismisses all that material. You can't tell black people that we're inferior when you have, a W.E.B. Du Bois on the scene, or when you have a Marcus Garvey on the scene, or when you have, a Mary McLeod Bethune on the scene, because we debunk, those scholars debunk those negative stereotypes. You know what I'm saying? So, those are the types of things that impact me as a collector and as an educator.
Yeah, man, we definitely have to get you here to the city of New Orleans, because as you can imagine, much of the culture that makes this city as great as many people talk about it is a result of the African influence, right?
Yes, sir.
It's filled with it, man. And I know as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking about people who would love to have you here as well. In regards to the museum, like, what's the capacity? Like, how many people can enter it at a time?
Right. So this is the deal. So for many years, I had a trailer that we would take around to different parts of Detroit. But we learned over time that the expense of taking the trailer outside of Michigan was such that it wasn't, worth us, if we were to come to New Orleans, the cost would be too expensive. Mm-hmm. So we realize and understand that the value in the work of this museum is in the collection itself. So what we do is that we take the collection around the country, and we go onto a campus, or we go into a church or a mosque or library or a museum, and we actually set up the artifacts, in space that's provided to us, and we actually transform that space to into a museum itself. So people come through and they experience the museum in those spaces that are in the different places that we go to. So wherever we go, it's 10 tables worth of 10 tables, 6 foot, 8 foot tables worth of material, and about 150 to 200 artifacts.
Wow. And is there an entrance fee for people to come and see the museum?
And it depends upon the place. For the most part, the people, the campuses that bring us in, they sponsor us to come in, and they open it up to the student body through student programming funds that they have, or the K-12 schools that we're invited to will bring us in, and we display at the school for the day, and then after school, the schools usually invite the community in, and sometimes we do professional development for the teachers. We also do professional development for the parents as well. So, and just to let the audience know, in terms of my background too, I'm currently working on a PhD at the University of Illinois in museum studies and curriculum and instruction. So, this work that I do is not just a hobby, but it's my life's work, and I'm professionally trained in it as well.
Wow, that is good, man. May Allah bless you with success with pursuing of your doctorate degree. Because,
Thank you,
man,
brother.
we need more. We need more people who have these degrees, but have that consciousness, have that knowledge
Yes, sir.
of self. And even inside of the school systems, and I know you can imagine. Now, with your book is titled "The Center of the Movement: Collecting Hip Hop Memorabilia," right?
Yes, sir.
So tell me,
sir.
like, why that focus, why that title, and what can readers expect when they read the book?
Right. So the book is actually the first book on the subject of collecting hip-hop memorabilia. And the reason why we felt the need to write this book is that hip-hop has had a 40-plus year history, and over this period of time, people, we listen to the music, we participate in the culture, but the way that we know that the culture exists is through the artifacts that are produced by the culture. It's those cassette tapes, it's the albums, it's the party flyers, it's the clothing, it's the promotional material. So all these things that the culture produces are artifacts, and it's the evidence of the impact that the culture has had on popular culture, on popular culture or on society. So those are the types of things that I've collected, and actually there's museums and archives that have been started in recent years at different colleges and universities. So right now, Cornell University has the largest collection of hip-hop memorabilia. They have the hip-hop, it's called the Hip-Hop Collection at Cornell University. Harvard has one, the University of Houston, William and Mary College has one, and then different museums are also starting to get archives and starting to display hip-hop memorabilia. So the Smithsonian in D.C. has a hip-hop collection, and some of that material is on display. One of the sections in the Smithsonian has a memorabilia from the Last Poets, as well as someone out of Detroit, a producer by the name of Jay Dilla. So Jay Dilla, the title of the book comes from a Jay Dilla track called "The Center of the Movement" that he did with a group called Five Elements out of Detroit. So that's where the name comes from, the Center of the Movement. And I believe that these artifacts are the center of the movement. Like it's these pieces that reflect again what the contribution, what the impact is of the culture, and from that centering, we can talk about the history and talk about who's done what in terms of the culture.
Wow, and that's amazing, man. And being that we're talking about hip hop, when you look at the current hip hop climate or atmosphere that we have now, we know that there are artists who have that consciousness, but however, they're not the ones whose music, for the most part, make it to the airways for people to hear. What impact do you believe that it would have if those artists of the conscious artists, that if their music was played more readily on air, on TV, as we see some of the other videos and music, what impact do you think that would have on the black community and just America as a whole?
It would have the same impact that it had on you and I when we heard it. I mean, it's powerful when you have an artist that speaks to not your lowest desire, but speaks to the best of you and speaks to what you're longing for. You know what I'm saying? It speaks to your experience. It just resonates with you on a whole different type of level. So the impact is it's invaluable. You know what I'm saying? You can't even put a value on it. I mean, when you think about just your experience and what a group like a Public Enemy did for you, and not saying that the culture does not have room for these other voices, right, which they do. You know what I'm saying? Because I'm sure well, maybe not you, but I know for me, I was listening to Public Enemy, but when a 2 Live Crew song came on back in the day, I was nodding my head to that joint too. You know what I'm saying? So it's like
me too.
You know what I'm saying? So I mean, if we're honest, we listen to all that, and even some of the stuff I'm hearing from some of these newer artists now that I don't listen necessarily to the lyrics, but in many cases can't even understand what the lyrics are. You know what I'm saying? But you find yourself dying to that beat though. You know what I'm saying? So there's room for all that in hip hop. But I think what the problem is with it today is that there's no balance in hip hop. You don't hear where's the voice of a Public Enemy in today's hip hop, and so you do have a handful, but you just don't have that same balance, that representation on the radio stations as you had back in the day. I can't even listen to I went home to Detroit home a couple months ago and turned on the radio, man. I can't even listen to what's on the radio right now. I just it's just terrible. It's garbage. So I don't even listen to it. And that same programming happens in every urban area in America. And I just shake my head at it. You know what I'm saying? And we really need to challenge that a lot more. I remember in Detroit, at least, we used to protest it. There were artists that went downtown to the radio station and picketed them playing not only the negative music, but also refusing to play the artists that were from Detroit. I mean, Eminem even couldn't get radio play on the station when he was an artist in Detroit. Imagine that. So so there were artists who organized in Detroit and actually went down to radio stations and forced their hands to play more things that represent those artists. But even today, it's still a huge challenge, because a lot of it's corporate owned. I mean, the radio station is not owned by people who live in Detroit. They're owned by a major conglomerate, so that you don't have access to. So
and that's something. Well, in regard to this political climate in which we're in, have you noticed a greater inclination or a greater desire amongst black people to see the mobile museum in this Donald Trump presidency than prior?
I have to be honest and say, yeah. I mean, I've had more calls this year than I've had in the past. I just came off of a tour that started January 3rd. Went from January 3rd to mid-April. 15 states, 40 stops. And I would say many of those calls that I got to go out on the road came as a result of people just having a lot of questions about where do we go from here, and and what do we do in the Trump presidency? And my response is, we continue doing what we've been doing in terms of our struggle, man. We cannot ever think that this society is going to give us what we need to liberate ourselves. This is going to be a constant struggle in America, dealing with white supremacy in America, and the struggle does not stop. We have to pick up the baton and keep it moving forward. And in this museum is just a reminder that the material in the museum is a reminder that we should always keep the legacies of people like Marcus Garvey, Paul Robeson, Kwame Ture, Malcolm X, the most honorable Elijah Muhammad, Ida B. Wells, all these people who sacrificed their lives, Fannie Lou Hamer, Ella Baker, keep these legacies alive, because they really left a template of success for us. And all we have to do is go back and study it. I mean, that's the least we can do is understand the contributions that these people made and the sacrifices that they made to kind of push the needle forward. And ideally, that's what we need to be doing now. You know what I'm saying? What 50 years from now, what are people going to say about us, about our generation? You know, and I want us, I want to be on the right side of history. So we have to challenge. We have to teach our young people critical thinking skills, man. We're not taught to think.
Mm-hmm.
We're taught to consume. We're taught to be a part of the system. You know what I'm saying? And we have to teach our young folks to critique the system.
Mm-hmm.
You know
that is
saying?
true.
Ask questions. Ask
That's
critical
right.
questions. So again,
that is true. I don't know if you know Marcus Garvey was they deported him from New Orleans.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
did not
they
know
deported him from New Orleans, man. And
wow.
And then in addition to modern history, I don't know if you came across it, there was just this big controversy here in the city where a grassroots organization, shout out to Take 'em Down NOLA, they began a movement to have some of these Confederate statues removed here in the city of New Orleans, because there's a lot of Confederate statues and names of streets, and there was a big controversy. But they stuck to the fight and were able to get it down. And what's interesting, how, of course, you see the Caucasian people out there who have the Confederate flags and they're waving the flags. You see them. But what was interesting was those who were using the millionaires and billionaire whites in this city, who was using their finances to put pressure on political officials or state legislators, and all because of the removal of a statue. And some people are saying, it's just a statue, but it goes to show you that if these people with these millions of dollars are trying to oppose it, they understand the value of symbolism, they understand the value of artifacts, they understand the value of history,
Indeed, yeah. So I've seen some of that on the news recently. I didn't know what the organization was that started it, so shout out to them, man. And we need to have organizations that recognize the value in taking those symbols down, and but you know what? But not necessarily destroying those symbols, but using those symbols as teaching tools. You know what I'm saying? So, because I know that many times people walk through the exhibit and go, "Oh, why don't you just burn, the Klan stuff, or why don't you burn these lynching photos?" Yeah, you can burn that stuff, but if you erase that from the memory of the people, then you don't have evidence of what really happened.
That is true.
You know what I'm saying? So we gotta keep that evidence, because it's one thing to tell somebody about the Klan. It's one thing to tell somebody about some of these negative, stereotypical images and postcards and things that are represented in the museum. But some of the stuff is so absurd that explaining it, people won't believe you if you try to explain it to them. But then you show them a book that was written for children called 10 Little Nigger Boys, and they go, "Wow, that was actually written. Somebody actually took their time to put this book out." You know what I'm saying? So we gotta collect that evidence and remind people. You don't, when you think about the Holocaust, you walk into every major city in America has a Holocaust museum.
That's right.
They didn't burn those. They didn't burn those artifacts, so they didn't take parts of the things from the concentration camp and just throw those away. You could walk in and see chains from a concentration camp, or the uniforms that they wore, or the uniforms that Nazis wore, the guards wore. So we don't take those things and throw them away. But again, we take wherever those statues are taken down, they need to create maybe a park somewhere where all those types of statues are right in that park, and just like a Holocaust museum, you walk through and go and you point out and you teach using those statues what oppression looks like and what what racism looks like in America and what that legacy is, and then make those connections to how that legacy is represented in today's world, in society today. You know what I'm saying? And tie number 45 into that, because he's connected.
And that's a fact, man. And his what's the guy who was a part of his administration? His name is Beauregard. I think his middle name, the Sessions guy, his name is Beauregard. And that was one of the statues that they had removed here in the city as well. So as we're nearing a few more minutes, so what are your plans for the future as it relates to the Black History Mobile?
The future is taking it as to many places as possible. The future is to grow it into having multiple exhibits out on the road. The future is writing more books, and the ultimate is training a new generation of young folks to take over this museum. That's my biggest challenge right now. Is finding someone who has the desire and the passion to take over this work, and for it not to be put into an archive or a museum somewhere not to be seen, but to make it accessible. Because that's the thing about this museum, is the accessibility of it. It has to be put in front of the people who would not ordinarily go into a Black museum. When you think about the Smithsonian in D.C. right now, which is a beautiful museum, and I encourage everybody, if you can, to go there. But realistically, how many people from the east side of Detroit, for example, where I taught at, is actually going to take their time and go to D.C. and go to that museum? Unfortunately, I know a lot of my students who have never left the block. You know what I'm saying? So we have to have a commitment for those of us who are not leaving our neighborhoods for whatever reason, to take these experiences to them and to encourage them to look at museums in a different type of way, show them what the function of a museum is. You know what I'm saying? Because a lot of people don't understand what the function of a museum is in society is very important.
And can you explain the function?
It teaches you what to value in society. It teaches you the contributions of people of a society or a community. When you think about the reason why Black museums were even started in the first place, is because Black voices were marginalized in mainstream museums. Or the representation of Black people in mainstream museums were very narrow or very negative. So you might have in a mainstream museum the representation of Black people just as a primitive people, you know what I'm saying, or very, very represented in just a very tribal type of way. You know what I'm saying? Just something that's not. And when I say tribal, not talking about the great accomplishments of tribal societies, but something that's very negative, in terms of representation of indigenous people and indigenous experience. Very negative, or very narrow in that representation. But it took Black people, actually mobile museums, I'm not new with this. Mobile museums were really the first representation of Black museums in America. There were collectors who would take artifacts to churches and to schools. Now I'm talking back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, taking material and teaching about Black history. That's how you learned it in the church or in schools. You know what I'm saying? But over time, the Black Museum movement really started in the 1960s during the Civil Rights movement, with people like Dr. Margaret Burroughs, who started the DuSable Museum, and Dr. Charles Wright of the Wright Museum in Detroit. And yeah, I really see myself in that legacy, you know. And yeah, yes, sir. So
that's a fact, and you have an aspect of it that you have with the influence of hip hop, you know, which reflects the generation that you are from as well, man. So that's
exactly. So yeah, so every era has to, you know, step up and represent their contribution of the time period that they're in. So the civil rights movement informed Dr. Charles Wright, Dr. Margaret Burroughs. My personal experience was informed by hip hop. So that's when you see that representation. But it's up to me to bridge that gap between that era and my era, and whoever comes after me, it's their responsibility not only to collect, but to bridge my era and that future era as well. So, but yeah, that, you know, so for the future of what this is looking like, is training up a new group of young folks to take over the museum and make a commitment to make sure that this material is accessible to future generations.
Wow. So we're going to wrap up. Can you, for those who are listening to this show and want to get in contact with you, what's some of the best ways they can reach you?
Yeah, they can call me direct at 313-645-4197 or email me at bhistory101@yahoo.com. The letter B, the word history 101@yahoo, or find me on Facebook at Black History 101 Mobile Museum.
Wow, my brother. So once again, man, I can't thank you enough for this opportunity to be able to interview you. And man, you have my word on it, brother. As soon as I get off the phone, I'm gonna start making some calls to people that I know will be interested. And we definitely want to get you here in the city, man. Especially, I'm thinking about you have not, of course, Bayou Classic, that's in November, but you have hundreds of thousands of black people come here to the city doing Essence Fest. So we're going to look to see about what we can do to get you here, because our city can definitely benefit from it. So thank you, brother. May Allah continue to bless you and safe travels. And for our listeners, thank you all for tuning in again to another broadcast of Class is in Session. This is WBOK, 12:30 a.m., where it's real talk for real times. Peace. Let me stop the recording.